Last year, the USA was on the brink of a debt ceiling crisis. You might have seen those headlines claiming the imminent collapse of the dollar and the unsustainable national debt. It's most likely that you've already grown a bit skeptical of yellow journalism, but hold on, I've got a story for you, both sad and insightful, about how 10 years ago the world's reserve currency came dangerously close to crumbling under the weight of national debt. And while I'm waiting on that big check for my propaganda efforts from Putin himself, today's focus is on decaying Europe and specifically the Eurozone debt crisis. Though it was the USA that pushed Europe into that crisis. Remember the 2008 mortgage crisis? Over 5 years, 465 American banks collapsed. Just a bit of perspective, in the 5 years before that crisis, we only saw about 10 banks go bankrupt. And these banks fit into this small table here, so yeah, the banking sector took a massive hit back then. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Banks collapsed? Good riddance! But here's the thing. The banking system is essentially the engine that powers our economy, generating the money supply. What about inflation? Hold on, we're getting there. So for every deposit you make in a bank, that bank turns around and lends it out, creating a cycle where more deposits lead to more loans. This increases the amount of money circulating, which should translate into higher effective demand and improved economic activity. But this whole party of supplying more money into the economy has got a limit, and that's when we hit full employment, when most of us gets a job. Once you push past this point, if you keep printing money, you're going to stir up inflation. That's what's happening in Russia right now. The government ramped up military production, which boosted other related sectors. Unemployment fell, and now, if they continue with the soft monetary policy, inflation's going to pick up speed. That's a battle the Russian central bank is currently fighting. On the flip side, if there's way less money floating around, unemployment starts to climb. Well, there's still stuff to buy, but people just don't have the money for it. Businesses can't make sales, so they shut down. And the next thing you know, there's crowds of people out of work. It's a vicious cycle that can drag the economy into a full-blown depression. That's the grim picture the world faced in 2009. As the banking sector took a nosedive, those who lost money also lost their trust. Banks tightened the credit requirements, which nearly halted the growth of the money supply. This freeze in the financial system eventually put the brakes on the entire economy. Now, if you're still with me, here comes the million-dollar question. What's the big issue with the euro? One currency for a whole bunch of different countries. Usually, a country has its own central bank and currency, which it can manage pretty directly. During the recessionary gap, especially following a crisis, one of the central bank's jobs is to lower the interest rate to boost the money supply. And here's the European Union with a bunch of countries using one currency, the euro, governed by the European Central Bank. But the deal is the impact of a crisis doesn't hit every country the same way. So, here's what we saw after 2008. On one side, we have a European country that quickly bounced back from the aftermath of the mortgage crisis. On the other side, we have a country that's, well, doing not so great. The crisis hit it much harder. The European Central Bank decides to cut the interest rate from 4% down to 1%. Banks get more active, loans flow more freely, and the amount of euros in circulation increases, aiming to revive the economy. For our first country, this is enough, but pushing more cheap money into its economy now risks sparking inflation. But for our second country, it's like the storm never passed. Despite the lower interest rates, it's facing a cycle of collapsing banks, fleeing investors, shuttering businesses, and climbing unemployment rates. So, what's going on here? And someone might say, why not loan to banks in the struggling country at a lower rate and keep rates higher for the country that's doing well? But here's where it gets tricky. Arbitrage. Banks in the struggling country could take those cheap loans from the ECB and then lend the money out to the prosperous country seeking higher returns. Suddenly, the money that was supposed to help the struggling economy is doing nothing but fueling inflation in another country. So, what's a country to do when it's deep in a crisis and central bank funding is not enough? Well, a solution was proposed about 70 years ago by American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and British economist John Maynard Keynes. Boost government spending! If the central bank's hesitant to pump money into the economy, then it's time for the state budget to intervene. Now, whether Roosevelt's approach actually worked is up for debate. On one hand, the New Deal policy, despite the substantial deficit, managed to stimulate demand and nearly restored the economy to its pre-1929 levels. Yet the primary catalyst for the economic recovery wasn't the government's investments during the 1930s, but rather World War II, which generated military orders that filled the US budget and provided American citizens with jobs, if you can say so. Drawing parallels with Russia today is tricky, but here's an interesting point to ponder. America is unique in its ability to sustain a budget deficit and accumulate national debt primarily because it prints the very dollars that became crucial to the global economy post-World War II and continue to be in demand today. Now, what can a small southern European country offer globally to justify significantly boosting government spending, running a deficit budget, and rising external debt? First up, let's highlight our top performers, the Eurozone's Wall of Fame. The graph displays the national debt to GDP ratios for Germany, Austria, Finland, and the Netherlands. And those are the best ratios you'll find in the EU at that moment. Well, and Luxembourg, which often, even now, gets overlooked. Now let's bring in details for 4 more countries: Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece. They're commonly grouped together as Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, making up the acronym PIGS. Sometimes Ireland joins this group, but then the acronym won't be that catchy, so we'll leave Ireland out for now. A not-so-flattering acronym points to the PIGS' fiscal irresponsibility. On one side, you've got countries that adopted balanced budgets and conducted prudent fiscal policy. Meanwhile, the others were busy printing bonds and financing inflated government expenditures by increasing debt. Now let's imagine the unemployment rates during the post-crisis period in these same countries. And unemployment is a key indicator for the central bank. By 2010, thanks to measures of monetary stimulation, Austria and the Netherlands saw their unemployment rates drop to around 5%, with Germany catching up a few years later. Keeping on with a soft monetary policy, though, would have only fueled inflation, so basically our group of top performers had already overcome their challenges. If you found Finland's figures impressive, just wait until you gain some perspective on them. Get ready for some alarming charts on unemployment in the PIGS countries. Italy managed to prevent unemployment from hitting double digits early on, thanks to increased government spending. Unfortunately, this tactic didn't do much for the other 3. So, by the early 2010s, the European Central Bank was stuck with a dilemma. A lenient monetary policy risked causing inflation in the Netherlands, Austria, and Germany, while tightening it would leave Portugal, Greece, and Spain without essential means to fight off the crisis's lingering effects. Just a quick reminder here, the central bank's primary mission isn't to foster economic growth. Its main focus is on controlling inflation. So when the ECB had to choose between rescuing Spain and Greece from their economic crises or protecting the entire Eurozone from severe inflation, they leaned towards the stability of the currency. The PIGS countries were left without the support of the ECB's magical printing press. Their only option was to keep printing new government bonds, and that's exactly what they did. Things got so intense back in February 2012 that economists at Citigroup came up with the term Grexit, signalling what looked like an inevitable scenario: Greece exiting the Eurozone and reverting to the drachma as its national currency. We raise our estimate of the likelihood of Greek exit from the Eurozone, or Grexit, to 50% over the next 18 months, from earlier estimates of ours which put it at 25 to 30%. Sounds a bit like the famous Brexit, doesn't it? Well, it's actually the other way round. The term Brexit came into the picture a few months later, drawing inspiration from Grexit, though this is something the Greeks won't be particularly proud of. Here's an interesting tidbit. Back in mid-2012, some dude actually created a plan for exiting the Eurozone. The foreword outright states that up until recently, the idea of what to do if the euro collapses had barely crossed anyone's mind, at least not publicly. This work was awarded the Wolfson Prize, considered the second coolest award after the Nobel Prize. It's titled Leaving the Euro, a Practical Guide. It serves as a roadmap not only for Greece but also for any other country in a similar situation, like Portugal or Italy. Think about it. Italy, one of the 6 founders of the European Economic Community, abandoning the euro. The reputational damage to the euro could have been monumental. The situation was so tense that bookmakers said their clients were lining up to place bets on the whole Eurozone ceasing to exist by the end of 2012. It's a real mirror to human nature, isn't it? Amidst all the crises and wars, the world turns into a stage, and there we are, sitting in the audience with our popcorn, placing bets on the outcome of the disaster playing out before us. And if you think this hasn't always been the case, check out our video to see how we've come to view life's quality through the ages. For sure, if a bunch of countries decided to abandon the euro, the European currency wouldn't have ended. However, the situation could have made other countries think twice about joining the Eurozone. Plus, in the countries that were already using the euro, more people could have started calling for a return to their own national currencies and cutting ties with the European Central's control. Even if countries like Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and a few other top countries kept using the euro, the currency's reputation would have taken a serious hit for a long while. It would have been a huge shake-up. In this sense, Brexit didn't really hit the euro currency that hard, mainly because the UK stuck with its pound instead of switching to the Eurozone's currency. In 2012, a major economic and reputational crisis was averted. For 8 years, the European Union had Greece's back, providing loans to help it buy back government bonds. They wrapped up this financial help only in 2018. This didn't stop Greece from defaulting in 2015, but if you look it up, Greece still uses the euro. Similar bailout efforts were made for other struggling economies in the rest of the PIGS countries, but those were not as big. Basically, Northern Europe spent a few years buying up the debt of Southern Europe. Can we call this a happy ending? If you're living in Greece or Portugal, it might feel like it. Unemployment rates have been falling, euros are still fine for buying stuff, banks are doing all right and the GDP is growing. But did these countries really fix their underlying economic issues? Not really. They've been given a fish, but not taught how to catch a fish on their own. It's like they've been in a constant sprint through the 2010s, like Alice in Wonderland, running just to stay in the same place. So Greece was pretty much on financial life support from outside until 2018. And though Europe managed to pick up a few key lessons from this crisis, you know how it is, fix one thing and suddenly you've got a new set of issues popping up. The headline you've just read might seem like a tongue twister, but it's also a checklist to see if a country's got what it takes to use the euro. Among other things, a country's budget deficit has to be under 3% of its GDP, and its public debt can't exceed 60% of GDP. So, how did Greece get into the Eurozone when its debt was bigger than its GDP? Well, they falsified the statistics.
Nice.
A currency union must be more stable than a marriage, otherwise nobody will believe in it. That's why, prior to a euro accession, we must look much more closely than we did in the past. It's true that Greece became a euro member in 2001 after having forged the statistic material. To this day, I blame myself for that. As a finance minister, I didn't want independent EU statisticians to be allowed to review national data. That's why we've changed this. Today, the independent EU statistical office, Eurostat, can thoroughly check the books of all EU member states. So, Europe is capable of learning from its mistakes. And Greece wasn't alone in this creative approach. Other countries, including Italy, Spain, and even Germany, did the same and masked the true size of their budget deficits and public debt. But the big problem isn't just these financial manipulations. It's what happens when countries actually try to play by the rules and stick to those Maastricht Criteria, keeping their budget deficit and public debt within those tight limits. What's wrong with following the rules? Well, let's take a step back. Remember, the Eurozone shares a one-size-fits-all monetary policy, but each member country has different economic needs. With the European Central Bank handing out money, some countries ended up with too much cash while others didn't get enough. Southern European countries tried to boost their economies by spending more government money, leading to bigger deficits, then more debt, and a long-lasting economic crisis while the rest of the world had already moved on. Following the Maastricht Criteria to the letter could cut these countries off from both monetary and fiscal stimulus, leaving them to watch their economies nosedive into a depression without any way to pull out of that dive. A potential fix might be a quantitative easing program. This would mean the European Central Bank steps in to buy up the problem country's public debt. This move gives the country some breathing room to increase its government spending up to the allowed cap. Once they hit that limit, the cycle repeats. The ECB buys the debt again, and so on until they pull through the recession. It's basically what the ECB did for the PIGS countries back in 2010, but this time they'd be getting ahead of the problem instead of tackling it because it's a looming default. So, the Eurozone managed to navigate through the debt crisis without losing any of its members. Part of the debts was purchased by the EU to prevent further debt escalation. They handed out new loans for the rest, making sure countries were more fiscally responsible this time. So while the debt's still a heavy load, it's not shooting up into the stratosphere anymore, and Greece is managing to keep up with payments. On top of that, the crisis turned into a real learning moment for European officials and economists. They're keeping a much closer eye on how countries handle their budgets now. To back this up, they even set up the European Financial Stability Facility. Sure, we can't say never again to another crisis, but if history decides to repeat itself, Europe's now in a much better position to deal with it than it was 15 years back. Plus, unemployment rates have been dropping steadily, a spike initially triggered by the American mortgage crisis. Still, the deep-rooted issues with the currency union haven't vanished into thin air. the PIGS countries are still at the top of the list when it comes to public debt. GDP per capita in these countries still lags far behind the Eurozone's frontrunners. Interestingly, nations like Latvia and Croatia, which might not be any more stable than Portugal when the next economic storm hits, have also adopted the euro. Overall, things have gotten better since the crisis, but it's definitely too soon to relax completely. This situation is a textbook case of what happens when you try to get a team with players at different levels to play by the same rules. The less robust economies just can't keep up with the rules set by the top performers. You might wonder why even bother with these underperformers, constantly bailing them out, pouring money into their economies. Some might argue, why not just show them the door, either out of the Eurozone or the EU itself? But then there's a gentler approach to think about, keeping the EU together but ditching the one-size-fits-all currency idea. Imagine a kind of European multi-wallet system that allows for quick and easy currency conversions within the Eurozone for both individuals and businesses. This could sidestep dilemmas like in a crisis where Germany might just need a small boost but Greece requires a significant bailout. Countries could then tailor their monetary policies to what they actually need. And these are the age-old questions of any form of integration. Does the new candidate meet our standards? If they don't, are we prepared to support them no matter what? Sure, we might end up paying more than we'd like, but what benefits do we get from bringing in new territory? Getting this balance right is crucial here. Just to be clear, I'm talking about the Eurozone here. You know who to share this video with. We say a big thank you to the guys who support us on Patreon. And I'm the researcher.